Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Another massively important day in the history of Formula 1. Lewis Hamilton takes to the track for the very first time in Ferrari machinery, and lots of takeaways as well. Not ideal weather conditions, but some lap time information, some lap number information, comparisons drawn to Charles Leclerc, who took to the track later in the day as well, and Helmut Marko saying from the Red Bull perspective, it doesn't matter how good Ferrari's car is, it doesn't matter how good Hamilton and Leclerc are, Max is going to beat them both regardless. Do you agree? Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. This, by the way, if you guys haven't worked out already, is pretty much all the newspapers today in Italy, and I'm sure it's going to continue like that over the coming days. Before we get to the Hamilton stuff, this is another piece of the Ferrari puzzle. So this year, Ferrari are changing, as we know, their front suspension layout. They're going from push rod, as they've had now for a very long time, for like a decade, to a pull rod front suspension setup, basically. This is what Red Bull and McLaren have used now for some time, and clearly to good effect. There's a general feeling that while there may be no mechanical advantage, there is some degree of an aerodynamic advantage from doing so. Ferrari, though, had the option to do that last year, but they didn't. They stuck with it. But this year, Ferrari are making that relatively radical change. Haas, therefore, have the choice. Do we copy Ferrari or do we not? Now, they will buy the Ferrari components. Their choice is, do they buy this year's Ferrari components or do they buy last year's Ferrari components? So for Ferrari, they're changing to pull rod. They can analyze the repercussions of that. They can figure out what it's going to do to the rest of the car and obviously what that means. If Haas buy those parts when Ferrari design them, they're kind of like flying blind, right? Because they don't really know exactly what that's going to look like for them before they put it in their car. So if they do that, it may end up being faster by Abu Dhabi, but it will almost certainly cause problems in their machinery. So Haas have decided that they are going to deviate from what Ferrari are doing, and they're going to say, no, Fred Vasseur, or whoever's making the decisions in terms of this buying relationship, we want to buy last year's front suspension again. So it's probably not the absolute best, but Haas is saying, look, having last year's one from Ferrari is better than having this year's one, which might cause us problems. And last year's one was good enough to create, you know, what was obviously a race-winning and nearly championship-winning car in the SF24. So Haas are going to try and do something similar. Thought a pretty interesting plan from them, really. But let's just crack right on. This came out yesterday. Lewis Hamilton in his race suit for the first time. Not precisely going to be the one I don't imagine that he starts the season with, but it's kind of along the right lines. Hamilton in red. He actually captioned this first time in red, and then a few hours later he put this out, and in yellow as well. This is, of course, his helmet for the new year. Couple of potential takeaways. Just the red that is being used, it's kind of more of a burgundy. People are still trying to figure out what the new Ferrari is going to look like, what's the colour scheme going to be, what is the red that they're going to be using. This is the yellow as well. It's very much a Ferrari yellow, right? Like it's a different yellow than we've seen before. You guys can tell here, the yellow in the Ferrari logo compared to the yellow on the helmet is a very, very similar shade compared to some other yellows that we've seen Hamilton use in the past. So, yeah, Hamilton in a Ferrari with number 44 with the yellow helmet on, it doesn't get much better than this. So the levels of PR, the levels of like aura, if you want to use that word, are off the charts. As I've said a couple of times though, like with all this, you know, absolutely phenomenal marketing, and I'm sure that the dollar signs can be seen for Ferrari miles around with everything that's happened about this over the last few days, they're going to have to deliver right when they get to the circuit. And I think that is the fundamental takeaway for me, is that this was the first day for Hamilton to say, okay, this is what a Ferrari car is like. There's a few things that are notable here, one of which is this. You guys can see the IBM logo on the back of the rear wing. You know, another sponsor arguably ruining the beautiful Ferrari rear wing, but it is what it is, and this isn't necessarily the livery they're going to be having next year, but it's a similar livery to what they had last year, but on the year before's car. This is the SF23, and these are some early footages, really, of Hamilton taking to the track. It was 9:16 a.m. local time where Hamilton took to the track with his first laps in a Ferrari. You guys can see as well the camera they've got on this, so I'm sure the onboard footage is going to be spectacular. He spent the first little while waving to the crowd, basically, in the car. But there's lots for Hamilton to get up to speed with, really, because, as I was about to mention, and I'm going to do so now, he's been on Mercedes power his whole career. From the McLaren days to the Mercedes days, And Mercedes make their engines a certain way. They make their cars a certain way. Ferrari have their own marginal preference for things. Sure, the engine is still geared to have 8 gears, but the gearing of the engine is going to be substantially different when you need to shift, how it works between different corners. I think you can even see today in some of the pieces of footage that this Ferrari is very quick and grippy out of the slower corners. That's not just the car, that's also the engine. That's the way that Ferrari like to design their engine gear mapping, and just their engines in general have been quite strong at this due to various factors such as their turbo design. They're coming out of slow-speed corners. Ferrari are rapid in the acceleration phase, and this has been a benefit of their car for a very long time now. That's something that Hamilton will not have had really at Mercedes. Obviously, it's not an F1 car is slow out of a corner, but the Ferrari seems to be especially good. It has weaknesses in other areas, but this is something that Hamilton will need to learn and adapt to. I think this was after the test as well. Hamilton kind of said hello to some of the fans. I know there was talk about this just because, obviously, Sebastian Vettel did his first test at Ferrari a while ago, and that was a big deal, right? Vettel, 4-time world champion, joining Ferrari. And the Italian press was saying, yeah, there was quite a few people at Vettel's kind of first test like this, but it was nothing compared to what was happening today with Hamilton. This maybe isn't the best video, but there were tons of fans here. They were singing songs, they were chanting, they were saying hello to Lewis. It was, yeah, crazy stuff, and plenty of other images, such as this one, for example. I thought it was, the notable thing for me about this image is the fact that he's got a Richard Mille on. Of course, the watch that McLaren and Ferrari are sponsored by. Hamilton's been an IWC man at Mercedes for a long time. Now he's got a Richard Mille on, so that was notable, at least to me. This is the IVM on the rear wing, so there's a few other things that were noticed on the day as well, and just some additional shots, really, of Hamilton in the suit, in the helmet, in the car. Still does feel pretty surreal to think about. I know there's been lots of people today saying, like, wow, it's actually happening, right? I mean, this has been announced now almost a year ago, and there's been lots of waiting until this day. We've seen the images over the last few days, the first days at Maranello, but yeah, the first time Hamilton taken to the track in the Ferrari is an absolutely very big deal indeed. There are rumours that next weekend, or something like that, anyway, maybe next week, it's going to be in Barcelona, this Ferrari, and Hamilton may be driving it there as well. So that maybe is going to be the real possibility for Hamilton to get some very decent running in, because there's lots to learn, right? I mean, he's in a brand new car, brand new team, talking to his engineer on the radio. As I say, the car is going to behave differently as well to what he's used to. The steering wheel is going to be somewhat different. Like, there's lots to get up to speed with, and relatively quickly. He didn't get the chance to do the post-Abu Dhabi tyre test for either team, obviously not Mercedes, and not Ferrari with the way that things worked out. So this running for Hamilton is reasonably important. Are a set of good laps today massively relevant to having a good season opener in Melbourne? Not necessarily, but and Bahrain is going to be the real time in the car, but they will try and get Hamilton up to speed as much as possible. So as you can tell, it wasn't all on wet tyres. They did seemingly give Hamilton the better slot in terms of conditions today. He started out on the wets, did a few slow laps, but then the conditions improved enough to where he could stick on the hard tyres. I'm guessing these are hard tyres anyway. Kind of tough to say. Obviously, they're white rims, hard tyres. But these aren't the Pirelli compounds they use in the race. These are what they call like Academy Pirellis or something. Basically an inferior version of the actual race tyre. So I don't know if they use the same colour denomination, but whatever. He was doing long runs around Fiorano with the hard tyres on the SF23 with number 44 on the back. So some footage here from his first couple of laps. These are on the hard tyres. He wasn't pushing especially hard, but it was definitely true watching some of the other angles that the acceleration out of that specific corner there was stronger than maybe I might have expected from some other cars, especially given how hard he was pushing. But yeah, these were just some kind of shots really of his first few laps in the SF23. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, right? I mean, he was definitely pushing the limits at times. There was a couple of lockups in there. This was one angle of it. I almost used to, like back in the day anyway, I would associate Hamilton's style with locking up a wheel occasionally, because that's his strength as a driver, right? Braking super late into corners later than anyone else can get away with. And sometimes sometimes that's going to mean you take it slightly too far and you lock up. So Hamilton was definitely pushing the limits. He wasn't just driving around for the fun of it. So here was a lock up. Here was another footage as well of locking up the front left. So yeah, just thought it was kind of, I mean, this is a spectacular image, isn't it? So definitely Hamilton getting to grips with the car here relatively early on. And of course, people were looking at the numbers or just all the analysis and trying to figure out, okay, what's happening? Where is it? You know, the load on the rear wing and all this type of stuff. Not like it massively matters, but some changes to the livery, right? As people was mentioning, the black patch. You guys might remember the SF23 livery had this like black carbon fiber segment here. For some reason, they've got rid of that, which I think was probably a good idea for next year's livery anyway. And there was also this talk on the number of laps. So F1 Unchained did a video talking about this. He said that basically Hamilton was lapping like a minute a lap or something. The lap record here in at least the dry is about 56 seconds, something in that ballpark. So in the conditions, which are pretty wet on slower tyres, you know, Hamilton's lap seems pretty impressive. And he also got 30 laps in, which is not bad given the session, given what it was for. Like, you know, 30 laps around Fiorano is not so bad. And Hamilton did probably have the better and the more consistent of the conditions between himself and Charles Leclerc, who then took to the track later in the day when it was raining again. So here's Charles Leclerc in the car. You guys can see by the number 16 on the back of it rather than the number 44, which is still kind of mind-blowing. But yeah, here he is in the super wet tyres, just the wet tyres, but of course tyres that the drivers never actually get to use in race conditions because the race director never lets you race. This shot as well is just absolutely wonderful. Like, I just love this aerodynamic piece here. I know you see this on the cars quite often, but this shot especially, when you can see how the floor and the kind of aero on the car is interacting. You can even see it under the front wing where the moisture is moving, is just especially good. Reminds me of a shot, I think it was of the W14 when Mercedes had their promotional day at Silverstone and it was in the wet and people were looking at the the rain basically coming off the tyres to see if they could figure out anything to do with the aerodynamics of that particular machine. This of course was also from that season, to be fair. But this is Charles Leclerc in the car, and I think you can immediately tell watching this, Charles Leclerc is pushing harder than Hamilton was, which to be fair makes sense. Hamilton's got more to acclimatise to, but this was Leclerc in the wet, and he's clearly pushing pretty hard, I would say. Certainly in terms of the, you know, aggressiveness of his braking towards this turn here. I don't know the number of this corner. I'm not particularly familiar with Fiorano. But yeah, Leclerc was pushing pretty hard, I thought. But he probably didn't get as good of a running in today as he would have liked to compared to Hamilton. But here was Leclerc doing some donuts for the fans after everything was over, which I thought was pretty cool, right? Because Leclerc hasn't got the opportunity to do donuts over the last couple of years. Of course, he would have probably liked to in Abu Dhabi for the last 2 seasons, really. But it never happened for various reasons. The teams try not to let their drivers do donuts if they don't have to, just because it burns off rubber on the tyres, and that means when the car gets to the weighbridge, it's possible that the car might be underweight and then you get disqualified. You don't want that. That's what I think Toto Wolff was on the radio to Hamilton about after Abu Dhabi this year, because of course he had a great finish to come 4th in the end, overtaking Russell basically at the final corner. And then Wolff was on the radio saying, look, Lewis, if we get disqualified, who cares? And Hamilton was doing the donuts, right? So, you know, it's possible Hamilton would have lost too much rubber on the tyres, get disqualified. That's why the teams are sometimes against it. But usually they're against it, to be fair, because I guess there's no benefit really to them, unless it's a historic moment, such as was this. Okay, not the highest quality, but on the back right-hand side, this is Hamilton's mother. I just thought it was kind of a wholesome moment, really, Hamilton walking out to the adoration of the crowd. And actually, speaking of that, I've got this image for you guys as well, on what may be Angela Cullen in the pits. I don't know, does that look like Angela Cullen? To be fair, it kind of does, but also we have very few pixels to work with. It's plausible. But yeah, we saw the rumours yesterday. Maybe not even rumours. I mean, like some journalists are just straight up reporting it as fact that Angela Cullen is working with Hamilton again going forward at Ferrari. So that may be what's going on here. There were rumours that she was going to be there for the test, so it might be that. We know that Ferrari are taking substantial risk with their new car. They're changing up 99% of the components. They're trying to really have a big push this year to win both of the championships, which maybe they could have done 1 in another world last year, but eventually they walked away, of course, with 0. The other response here, really, to Hamilton's day, to some extent, was from Helmut Marko at Red Bull, because we know that they are preparing for the new season. We know that Toto Wolff has been talking to Max, and to be honest, Toto Wolff's discussions with Max and Jos and everyone in Max's camp are not over yet, as far as I'm concerned. There were rumours even a couple of days ago that Verstappen is pretty convinced that Mercedes will have the strongest engine in 2026, and there's something to think about there. But look, Max isn't going to say that. Helmut Marko is going to say that. Certainly Red Bull aren't going to say anything about it. And Marko says, that's all well and good for Toto to have interest in Max, but Max has a contract with us until the end of 2028. I know how loyal and grateful he is to Red Bull. He will also be a Red Bull driver in 2026 and as a 5-time world champion. So, you know, good confidence here from Marko, saying that, look, Max is going to stay with us. There's no doubt about it in 2026 as well and beyond, seemingly was his implication. That he's going to win next year's championship. He's going to become a 5-time champion, and there's no way he's going to leave us in that scenario. Will that happen is a question. Is Max the favourite for the championship? I still think if I had to, put money on who was going to win next year's championship, I think I would still put it on Max, just because he's so hard to beat. And I don't know who else I can pick over him, given, the circumstances. I don't know if I can trust Norris, and I can trust Hamilton and Leclerc, but, they may take too many points of each other. I don't know if I can trust Ferrari, because they're taking so much risk. There's so many factors in play. But look, Marko says, Leclerc is strong in qualifying, but he makes too many race mistakes. Hamilton still has speed, but can he maintain it all season? I doubt it. Even with a strong Ferrari and a mediocre Red Bull for Max, I would still bet on Max, says Marko. So look, obviously Marko's going to back his man, but I thought it was an interesting statement that, in his opinion, even a mediocre Red Bull for Max, which is maybe what Red Bull are, thinking they might deliver at this point, and even with a strong Ferrari, he reckons Max would have too much because Leclerc will make too many mistakes and Hamilton won't be consistent enough. Both of those arguments you can make for sure, and it is one of the reasons why Max is so hard to beat. But in my opinion, if there was a mediocre Red Bull and a strong Ferrari, it's funny that he doesn't even mention McLaren and Lando, but I'm just assuming that the McLaren is terrible for some reason. I would expect one of the Ferrari guys to win. I think they're just too good. But as I say, points will be taken off one another on weekends where the car is good. And also Hamilton, after all of this that's been going on, all the song and dance about it, he's not putting pressure on himself, because obviously there's pressure. You're driving for Ferrari and you're trying to achieve the ultimate ambition of winning the 8th world title and breaking the record. That's what the Tifosi wants at this point. But, since 1994, no driver over 40 has won a Grand Prix. I think that will change with Hamilton, but it is nonetheless a talking point that Hamilton, this is maybe his year to deliver, and maybe next year, maybe the year after, he might get another couple of chances. But age will catch up to him eventually, you would think, and, this may be the year to execute, and certainly there's a lot of pressure on Hamilton to deliver exactly that. Just before we close out the video, I got to run through the race fans' rankings of the day. Ricciardo got 18th, as we saw yesterday. So I was wondering, okay, 18th for Ricciardo feels a bit harsh. So I just kind of wondered who they would place just above him. 17th went to Colapinto, which he may have been higher if it was only his first few races counted. But of course, with the smaller sample size, you're naturally going to be a bit further down the list, I would say, anyway. So Colapinto gets 17th. 16th went to Lawson, which is interesting because Lawson was pretty close to points on many weekends. But out of the 6 weekends he drove, there was only probably 2 of them where I'd say he was actually particularly great. So, I think you can argue this a number of different ways. Should Lawson be above Ricciardo? Maybe. Should Colapinto be above Ricciardo? I get it, but it's still kind of controversial. And then we've got Valtteri Bottas closing out the day in P15. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.